Well, welcome to the Spirituality and Healthcare Grand Rounds this noon. I'm Ruth Johnson. I'm a physician in the Department of Internal Medicine and chair of the Spirituality and Healthcare Committee. Today's presentation is sponsored by our committee in conjunction with the Department of Chaplain Services. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Brian Luke Seaward, who is regarded as one of the foremost experts in the field of stress management and a pioneer in the field of mind, body, spirit healing. Dr. Seaward has a number of degrees. I'll start with his Master of Science degree from the University of Illinois, which was in physical education, exercise physiology, and health education. And he actually started his career nearby as the Associate Director of Cardiac Rehab at Gunderson Lutheran Hospital in La Crosse, Wisconsin, one of our neighbors. Then Dr. Seaward got a PhD from the University of Maryland in health psychology with an emphasis on psychophysiology. He has served on the faculty of a number of American universities and schools of public health. He's also the author of more than a dozen books. Now, I understand you initially wanted to be a sports writer, is that right? Okay, and maybe you'll tell us about that. But his books include bestsellers like Stand Like Mountain, Flow Like Water, The Art of Calm, and one of my favorite titles, Stressed is Desserts, spelled backwards. Currently, he's a Executive Director at the Paramount Wellness Institute in Boulder, Colorado, and a visiting professor at the Graduate Institute in Bethany, Connecticut. Today, he's going to share some of his wisdom and understanding of stress, which is a stranger to none of us. We experience this as we try to assist those we work to heal here at Mayo, and also work to keep our own lives in some kind of balance as we do our work and other family and personal responsibilities. We really look forward to your message, to what you have to share with us today, Dr. Seaward. And please, all of you, join me in providing a warm welcome to Dr. Luke Seaward.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a real honor to be here today. And I'm kind of curious to know the makeup of the audience, because this is a pretty liberal topic. And as we all know, the Midwest is not quite so liberal as parts of the other parts of the country. So, a show of hands. Who here is a nurse? Let's give them a round of applause. The front lines of healthcare. Any physicians here? Physicians, raise your hand. Couple. Great. Let's give them a hand too. My gosh. Okay. Do we have any priest nuns or former priests, former nuns? Let's give them a hand. All right. And now, just want to tell you, it's a liberal topic. I got to find this out. Was anybody in this audience here at Woodstock? Okay. Now you have to ask, was anybody conceived at Woodstock? Okay, so as you heard, I like to write books. I have the leading textbook in the college market on stress management for both graduate and undergraduate students. What you're about to hear is Chapter 7 on stress and spirituality. And so let's begin. I've been giving this talk like this for about the past 30 years, and I can tell you that when I saw this book come out, and this is not Photoshop, I just want to show you how far we've come in terms of spirituality hitting mainstream. It's like, oh my God, this is just amazing. Although I think they're a little confused about spirituality and religion. About 31 years ago, I had the pleasure of hearing Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was the keynote speaker at the American Holistic Medical Association in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I was doing a breakout session on the effects of cardiovascular exercise and heart disease, but I wanted to go hear her speak. And you probably know she's very famous for her work on death and dying, but she wasn't there to speak about death and dying this particular day. Her topic was on the idea of holistic wellness, and she said, wellness is a new word in the American vocabulary. But the concept is ageless. And she says, if you take a look at the word health, which is what most people think of when they think of wellness, she said, the word health is derived from the Anglican word which means to be whole or holy. She said, you cannot speak of health without invoking a sense of spirituality. And she said, the symbol of wholeness is a circle. And she said this, she drew a circle on a flip chart, and she said, look around the world and you'll see this is a universal symbol of wholeness. Well, I travel around the world, and I got to tell you, I've been to places like Ireland. And by the way, she said the wellness premise is that the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. I'll say it again. The whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. And in terms of this, I think of the Beatles. The Beatles never achieved the notoriety individually that they did as the Fab Four. Would you agree with that? So one prime example. One of my students, undergraduate, said, same with Simon Garfunkel. Before I could say yes, someone said, yes, but there are only two of them. You'll see 4 is a significant number here. Well, as it turns out, I've been to a place like Ireland, and look at this. This is actually the oldest petroglyph in Ireland. It is a headstone on the Dingle Peninsula, but it wasn't made as a tombstone headstone. It was actually a piece of artwork. It symbolizes a circle, the Celtic cross, wholeness divided into 4 areas. And then I was in the island of Polynesia, Bora Bora, and this is actually the sacred symbol of the Polynesian culture, the turtle. And I don't know if you see what I see, but I see a circle with 4 quadrants in there. I also went down to New Mexico not too long ago and saw this as a petroglyph on a rock formation. And this is actually, again, the circle with 4 quadrants. Well, if you were to talk to the shamans, the sages, the wisdom keepers, and the healers of all times, all cultures and languages, and ask them, what are the parts that make up the whole to be human? You would hear them say 4 things. Mind, body, spirit, and emotions. I'll say it again. Mind, body, spirit, and emotions. And Kubler-Ross said that these lines that separate these 4 components don't exist. They are just there for theoretical purposes. They're there for academic purposes, but you can't separate mind from body. You can't separate spirit from emotions. It's one beautiful dynamic package. But boy, do we try. And in the Western culture, we put a lot of emphasis on this particular quadrant because this is the most easily measurable. You can measure height and weight. This is solid ground to stand on. You can measure blood pressure. You can measure bone density. You can measure cholesterol levels. You can even measure the DNA. This we've got down really well. But Kubler-Ross said, if you don't honor the integration, balance, and harmony of all 4 components, you're going to end up with dysfunction. So every now and then, 2 other ones kind of fit the bill there, but how do you begin to even discuss spiritual well-being? Most people avoid it like the plague because they don't know where to begin. And she said, if you don't acknowledge this, you're going to end up with dysfunction. Dysfunction, the word back in 1981 was barely used. Today it's our national adjective. By the way, you have permission to laugh at my jokes, even if you think they're not funny, okay? So, I love this guy. This is one of my spiritual mentors, if you will, Carl Gustav Jung. He was a protege of Sigmund Freud, but it turns out that Freud was an atheist, and Carl Jung's father was a minister. And at some point, he said, I'm not buying this bit that we're just a bunch of animals operating on instinct. And the 2 went their separate ways, and Carl Jung went into a deep depression because he thought his whole career was washed up. But in this depression, he came up with concepts, theories that we now use in everyday conversation. It was his idea of the introvert-extrovert aspects of personality. It was his concept of archetypal symbols. It was his word, not Sting, when he came up with the concept of synchronicity. And so in terms of this, one of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung is this. He said, every crisis over the age of 30 is a spiritual crisis. And people thought he was talking about the midlife crisis. And he said, no, this is not what I'm talking about. Then he added this. He said, spiritual crises require spiritual cures. Spiritual cures, we might say in stress management, are coping techniques, effective coping techniques for dealing with this. But he called them spiritual cures. By the way, if you don't know this, a little reminder, since everyone here is very intelligent, I can just tell from the wisdom from the seats here, the word psyche means soul. The study of psychology is a study of the soul. Well, stress is definitely on the headline news. That's probably what brought you here to this talk, perhaps. It makes the headline news, I don't think, often enough. This is more important than Kim Kardashian, just FYI. Very, very important. We just emerged from the decade from hell, according to Time magazine. Rumor has it we're still in another one, so just hold your seats, or fasten your seatbelts. But we now know, or we're being told, that stress is actually good for you. And to a point, it is. To a point, stress is good. It can be motivating, but we are so far beyond that point as humans on this planet, I think. So I'm not sure why we're getting this. But we now have new updates about things, and even though we're saying that the economy is actually better, I don't know about you, but I'm not hearing this. Across the country, I hear people saying, we're still in trouble. Stress is still with us. And NPR just did a survey of stress with people in America about 3-4 months ago, and the #1 stressor for people is the economy. By the way, the American Psychological Association came out with their annual report on stress in February, and it's not pretty. If you get a chance, Google that if you want to see what they think is the heartbeat of the country in terms of the stress of the nation. So we have stress going to work. We have stress at work. This is Dr. Brad Cooper. We have stress going home from work. Hopefully you can't relate to this. By the way, I thought I'd get a new picture of this, and there are so many versions. This is not an uncommon occurrence, I discovered. And a lot of them are police cars, actually. We have stress in the summertime going home from work, and I love this cartoon with a guy flying home in a spaceship like George Jetson, and the glass, he's got his coffee mug, and it says down below, new technology, same mentality. And then when we get home, we've got stress. Hopefully you can't relate to this. But everyone's got stress. Stress is called the equal opportunity destroyer. Doesn't make a difference how much money you make, where you live. When we say everyone's got stress, I mean everyone has got stress. So, but it's worse than this, folks. When I say everyone's got stress, I mean everyone has got stress. I gave a talk at a hospital out in Colorado a few months ago, and this doctor came up to me and said to me, I want to talk to you about that slide in your presentation. I thought, oh my God, I knew I shouldn't have put it in there. And he said, I want to know where the hell you got a photograph of my daughter. Then I gave this talk, a talk very much similar to this, at Quaker Oats to show you how spirituality is reaching far beyond where we thought perhaps was possible in corporate America. And a woman said to me, I love this crescendo you're building about stress, but you're missing the last shot. And I said, there's more? And she goes, oh, honey, you have no idea. And she said, I'll send you a JPEG. 2 days later, I got an email that says, even the animal kingdom is stressed. Maybe you know this cat. Well, I love this quote. It says, the winds of grace are blowing perpetually. We only need raise our sails. That the dance between stress and spirituality is a dance. But we have the means to get through any situation as long as we put up our sails and let the winds of grace take care of us. I love the quote from Winston Churchill who says, if you're going through hell, keep going. Come on, that was funny. So, let's talk a little bit about stress. We could spend all day in this slide, but real quickly, we have two aspects of stress. There's good stress and there's bad stress. In the nature of stress, we have two categories. Good stress is where you feel euphoric, you feel exhilarated. You want to reach your hands up in the sky and say, it doesn't get any better than this. I hope that you all have those moments. Abraham Maslow called this the peak experience moments. But this does not make headline news. What makes headline news is the other kind of stress. We call this distress, or just plain stress. And there's two kinds of distress. There's acute, very, very intense, but very short-lived. And then we have chronic. Nowhere near as intense, but it goes on for longer than 20 minutes, which is what acute is. Acute, basically, if you go longer than that, you'll blow up. You know acute stress. Heart rate goes up. Blood pressure goes up. Your palms start sweating. You've all had this experience when you have looked in the rearview mirror and you see blue and red flashing lights. Okay, I know you've all had this. By the way, one of my friends is a policeman. He says, I have a story to share with you next time you give a talk, so here goes. He says, one of my buddies pulled over an offender. That's what they call people who speed, offenders of the law. And he pulls over and gets out of his car and walks up to the car and he says, buddy, I've been waiting for you all day. To which the driver said, officer, I got here as fast as I could. Chronic stress. Chronic stress, nowhere near as intense, but a lot longer in duration, days, weeks, months, years, some people even decades. When I talk to people about examples of chronic stress, I ask them, what are some examples that you have? And they all end with the same ending there. They say, the boss from hell, the teenage son from hell, the traffic from hell. Have you noticed how popular hell is becoming these days? Okay, so in a nutshell, that's the nature of stress. How we define stress? How much time do you have? Every discipline in the fields of academia all claim this to be their own. Psychology, physiology, anthropology, sociology, theology, and by and large, these people don't speak to each other. Let me give you some definitions. Let's start with Hans Selye. Hans Selye said that stress is wear and tear in the body. And all you got to do is think about a tension headache and think, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Richard Lazarus, famous psychologist, said stress is the inability to cope with problems. So we're going from a physical definition to a mental definition. The inability to cope with problems. And then another definition from the emotional aspect says that stress is the loss of emotional control. I worked at Gunderson Clinic, as I told you, and one of the doctors there, I'm probably telling secrets, but maybe he's no longer with us. It was a brain surgeon, and rumor had it, when things were going well, he'd bang his head against the wall. That's a great example of losing emotional control. Although road rage works pretty well too. And then I love this definition, but it's so abstract. Stress, spiritually speaking, is the absence of inner peace. You cannot be stressed and be relaxed at the same time. It's virtually impossible. But how about this definition? Stress is any change you encounter in your life. And by and large, people don't like change. The expression, the only person who likes change is a wet baby. The rest of us do not like change, especially change we can't control. So in terms of this, if you get a bunch of people together in a room like this and say, okay, no one's leaving until we all come to some consensus on what stress is, you might hear them say this. Stress is a perceived threat. We have the words perceived in quotes because you can have two people in the same situation. One person saying, God, isn't this great? Another person saying, I am freaking out. So stress is a perceived threat, and then we say in parentheses, real or imagined, because we can all make mountains out of molehills. You know, I love the quote from Mark Twain who says, I'm an old man now, and I've known a great many problems in my life, most of which never happened. So stress is a perceived threat, real or imagined, to our mind, body, spirit, or emotions. That is the definition I'd like to have you walk out here with in terms of the bigger picture. But how about this? Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. Isn't that nice? It's a lot of great wisdom from the Eastern culture. Slowly seeping over now because of the internet, but we could add some more. But how about this definition? Stress is a perceived disconnection from our divine source. Now notice the word perceived is also in quotes because the truth of the matter is we are never disconnected from our divine source, whatever you choose to call this, whatever you perceive this to be. But, and here's a huge caveat, if we have unresolved issues of anger and fear, it begins to cloud our vision symbolically, and we feel like we're cut off. We feel like we're separated. We feel like we're abandoned from the divine. The truth of the matter is, we're never disconnected. We're always in the presence, no matter what you perceive it to be, no matter what you call it. So I love this cartoon. It says, look, I've got a real busy day planned. I don't have time for a complete shakedown in my belief system. Have you ever had this thought go through your head? Like, why me? Why me? We've all probably had this. So there are two emotions with stress. Okay, actually there's hundreds, but they fall nicely and neatly into categories. Anger is the fight response. Fear is the flight response. Fight or flight. This is now so common you can see it on cereal boxes. Every other stress emotion falls under this umbrella of anger and fear. Anger and fear. Now, these are not bad emotions. These are healthy emotions. When I first heard this, I thought, you got to be kidding me. They're healthy emotions because they're survival emotions. You need anger and fear to kick in to protect you in case your life is threatened. Case in point, hypothetically, of course, if this building were to go up in flames, you would want fear to kick in so you can get out these doors to safety. Otherwise, you're going to become what is known in middle school as a piece of toast. Why do people kill? Why do people lie? Why do people steal? Unresolved issues of anger and fear. The connections between stress and spirituality are very strong. Well, I love this quote. It says, if you don't tame the kitten, the lion will eat you. And what this really comes down to is the idea about the ego. The ego is what signals a fight or flight response. And the ego is good in that role. When the ego gets beyond that role to become CEO, all hell breaks loose. And so we need to tame the kitten. There's a concept in the Eastern culture called domesticating the ego. And what it basically says is we've got to put the ego back in its place. And to do this, we need to dissolve the veils of illusion. In the Eastern culture, they talk about the veils of illusion being unresolved issues of anger and fear that cloud our vision. And what I found remarkable was a study was done at Harvard by an ophthalmologist to take a look at what happens to your vision when you get stressed. And what they found out time and time again is the more stress you have, you begin to lose your peripheral vision, so all you see is what is directly in front of you. This is not a poetic concept. This is actually a reality. And so notice the word dissolve is similar to the word resolve. As we begin to resolve issues of anger and fear, we strip away the veils of illusion to have a greater sense of clarity and perspective in our lives. You talk to anybody who's stressed, and I'll guarantee that's not what they're seeing right now. There is no clarity. There is just torment. Would you agree? And so, how do we begin to domesticate the ego? I love the expression that says, domesticate the ego, or you're going to have poop all over the place. That was funny, I thought. Oh my God. You guys are a conservative audience. It was true. Okay, again, you have permission to laugh, even if it's not, even if you think it's still funny. You know, I'll have to give you a cue like this. How do you domesticate the ego? This could be a topic that could go on for years. But I found one person who did a great way to describe it. Her name is Audrey Hepburn. And she actually, this was read at her funeral, although she didn't write it. It was written by Sam Levinson. He gave it to her as a gift, and she went, everywhere she went, she read this. And it goes like this. For attractive lips, speak words of kindness. For lovely eyes, seek out the good in people. For a slim figure, share your food with the hungry. For beautiful hair, let a child run his or her fingers through it once a day. For poise, walk with the knowledge that you never walk alone. People, even more than things, have to be restored, renewed, revived, reclaimed, and redeemed. Never throw out anyone. Remember, if you ever need a helping hand, you'll find one at the end of each of your arms. And as you grow older, you will discover that you have two hands, one for helping yourself and the other for helping others. This is, I think, one of the best ways in how we can learn to domesticate the ego, put it back in its spot, because the ego is the bodyguard for the soul. When the ego steps out of that role, again, I'm going to tell you, all hell breaks loose. The dance is over. So how do we define human spirituality? Well, I'm glad you asked. How much time do you have? This has been a topic of discussion by theologians for thousands of years. FYI, we're not going to wrap it up today, okay? This is just too big a concept. But you take a look around the world, and people who describe human spirituality talk about an energy, a flow of movement of energy. In fact, throughout the world, the word spirit and breath and wind are synonymous. I heard this from Kubler-Ross, and then I worked at the Gunnarsson Clinic, and I noticed that when someone dies in this country, and I'm not sure it still happens, but I'm thinking so, it's written on the charts, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so expired at 12:02. They still do that? Okay, that literally means the spirit left the body. Just FYI. And so in terms of this, how do we define human spirituality? Well, I'm not sure we can. It seems to be ineffable. It's beyond the ways in which we have of language to describe this, no matter what language you speak. English, Spanish, Swahili, Russian. But does that mean that we should stop trying? No. The World Health Organization said, let's give it a shot. They said this: spirituality is that which is in total harmony with the perceptual and the non-perceptual environment. Now, one of my favorite luminaries is Buckmaster Fuller. Brilliant guy. And he said 80% of reality cannot be perceived or detected through the five senses. That's the non-perceptual in this definition here. What if Bucky was wrong? What if it's only 40%? That's still a lot out there we don't know about if we're only using our five senses, which is what, by the way, Descartes said to do. That's the Cartesian principle. That's the scientific method. And although that's a good start, please don't end there. But the World Health Organization went one step further. They said this. They said, the existing definition of health should include the spiritual aspect, and that healthcare should be in the hands of those who are fully aware of and sympathetic to the spiritual dimension. First of all, I want to applaud the Mayo Clinic for having a spiritual group that you head up, because most places practicing medicine don't do this. The fact that you actually have this shows me that you may be conservative, but you're also enlightened. I thank you for that. So people do often mix up spirituality and religion. I want to tell you right now, they are not the same thing. Being wise, you knew that, but let's just review. Spirituality and religion are not the same thing, although they definitely have some similar ground they cover. One of my favorite things to do is listen to NPR News, all things considered. Anybody here fan of NPR? Okay. Did you guys pay your pledges? Okay, just checking. Okay, so I'm driving home from work one day. I'm living in D.C., and Noah Adams is interviewing a composer-conductor. And the conductor says, yeah, he goes, I love music. He goes, music's a very spiritual language. And I'm thinking, this is back about 20 years ago, and you didn't hear the word spiritual that much on the news. I turned the radio up. He said, when you listen to music, you eavesdrop on the thoughts of God. And I'm like, wow, that's beautiful. By the way, rap hadn't been invented yet, okay? Just FYI. And then he said, you know what the difference is between spirituality and religion? This is a composer-conductor saying this. And my first thought is, pull the car over and pull out a paper and pen and take notes. And he says, spirituality unites where religions divide and separate. Isn't that beautiful? One of my friends is a Catholic priest, and I told him this. He goes, yeah, we're taught that in seminary. He goes, we're taught this. The church has many, God has not, and God has many, the church has not. So there is an overlap, because spirituality is gearing you in the direction of the divine. That's what religions do. They gear you in the direction of the divine. But spirituality is inclusive. Religions are exclusive. You cannot be Jewish and Baptist at the same time. It's just not going to happen, I can guarantee it. That usually gets laughs too. Okay. I got this for a birthday card. I thought I'd put it in my slideshow. Some people hear spirituality, this is what they think too. This is just not the same thing I'm talking about, okay? This is a whole different ball. I thought I'd get more laughter with this too. I don't know, God. I dread to see the evaluations for this talk. But there is common ground. Spirituality and religion definitely have common ground, and that's what we want to talk about right now. So when people talk about spirituality, it's hard to put into words, but I found a language that works. It's not English, it's not Spanish, it's not German, it's not Russian, it's the language of metaphor. When people talk about spirituality, often they compare it to something else, because that's how they can begin to talk about this. And the metaphor they use is water. Spirituality is like water. It flows either in a liquid form, solid or gas, but it's there. Religions are like the containers that hold the water. And I put a few nice ones in. I put one with feet to make you laugh, although I should have known by now. The containers break, we still have the water. Does that make sense? So when people talk about spirituality, this is one thing they're addressing, a divine essence. And this goes by a great number of names. I could have put the word God. We've heard the word Allah a lot right now. But over in China, they use the expression the Tao. One of my friends, Larry Dossey, who does a lot of work on prayers and healing. You ever heard of Larry Dossey? He calls it the Great Absolute. That sounds too much like vodka to me, so I don't go that route. The American Indian tradition says, we call this the Great Mystery, the Creator. Every culture has a different way to look at this, describe this. And so I let you decide what you want to call it. I should put a little blank line there and let you figure it out. But no matter what we try, we come up short because this is beyond words too. Does it mean that we should stop? No. And here's one person who I think did a great job. Her name is Maya Angelou, and she said this: Spirit is an invisible force made visible in all life. I believe that spirit is one and everywhere present, that it never leaves me. I may withdraw from it, but I can realize its presence the instant I return to my senses. I cannot separate what I conceive as spirit from my concept of God. Isn't that beautiful? What I find so amazing right now is that for so long, spirituality was held pretty tightly in the hands of theologians who said, we'll tell you what this is all about. But today we have actors, we have athletes, we have poets, we have politicians, Václav Havel, Nelson Mandela, speaking about spirituality, and they're all right because this is an inclusive topic. Well, sometimes when people have stress, we call this a spiritual wake-up call because the ground begins to rumble under their feet, and all of a sudden now their comfort zones change, and now they're wondering what's going on. And when everyone has stress, at some level, it's a wake-up call to see the bigger picture. And so when people get stressed, they go on what is known as a spiritual hunger, trying to find answers to their problems. And what we typically say is a spiritual hunger may begin with what you know, but it oftentimes leads you elsewhere because sometimes our problems can't be solved in our own backyard. We go looking for answers elsewhere. And what they typically say is a spiritual hunger leads to a spiritual exploration. I gave a talk for the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Maybe you've heard of that group. And if you haven't, I highly recommend you get to know them because they talk about spirituality and science, saying the two are not separate, they're one. And I was there in California giving this very same talk, and a woman said to me in the back row at this point, I'm a Buddhist. I thought she had Tourette syndrome. And I said, well, thank you. And she said, I wasn't born Buddhist. I was born Baptist. FYI, big difference. Here's a woman who is saying, I have explored outside my backyard. And typically when people have stress, they can either dig a hole and keep going, or they can begin to look around, try and find answers to help them solve so they can actually come to some sense of inner peace. Well, here is the Matterhorn. And I often tell the story that I was in love with this gal named Debbie, and after about 6 months she told me to take a hike, so I took her literally. You can leave the country, just make sure you come back, but I decided to go to Switzerland, and this is the Matterhorn, but this mountain sits on the border of two countries, Switzerland and Italy. And in Switzerland they call the Matterhorn. In Italy they don't. In Italy they're called Monte Cervino. Sounds kind of sexy, huh? The French call it Mont Cervin, and the British wasn't even in their country. For a while there, they called it the Citadel. One mountain. 4 names. There's a message there. There's several ways to the top. I don't have a pointer here, but actually if I did, you'd see that there's several ways along the ridges here. I got about 2/3 of the way up before the clouds came in, and they say, clouds come in, get off. And if you ever go to Zermatt, there's a cemetery in the middle of town, and I thought to myself as I walked by, I am not ending my vacation there. It's not going to happen. So I got off. But it turns out that there's many ways to the top. There's a message there. There's many ways to the top. One of my favorite theologians, Matthew Fox, he says, I call it this, one river, many wells. So in terms of this guy also said it real nice too. He said, I have been to the mountain. Another metaphor to use about spirituality, because we want to try and get a sense of vision a little bit higher up. We go higher up on the path to try and get some clarity with things. And this is the idea. The mountain is the metaphor. So water, mountains. Even places where they don't have mountains. They speak of mountains as a spiritual experience, a spiritual retreat, a spiritual dynamic that they want to include in their life. I love this quote. It says, look at every path closely and deliberately. Try as many times as you think is necessary. Then ask yourself and yourself alone one question. Does this path have a heart? If it does, it's good. If it doesn't, it's of no use. One of my friends was giving a talk on spirituality. I went to go hear him. He said, the spiritual path. And I'm thinking to myself, what's he going to say? Because I know you can't measure the spiritual path in years. You just can't. You can't measure the spiritual path in experiences, but that's not a bad place to start. You can't measure it in possessions, but Lord knows we try. He says the spiritual path is 12 to 14 inches. And I thought, where the hell's he going with this? And he said, it's a distance from your head to your heart. And I thought, touché. I love this quote from Jean Chaubolin. She's a Jungian analyst. She says, we are not humans on a spiritual path. We are spirits on a human path. Now, I teach stress management. I've been doing it for about 35 years now. And I can tell you every semester, sometimes several times a semester, students will come to me and say, why this bad thing happened to me? I've lived by all the right rules. Why this bad thing happened to me? And if you see yourself as a human on a spiritual path and something bad happens, you're going to think you're punished. You're going to think you're abandoned. Those thoughts come up. That's par for the course. But if you see yourself as a spirit on a human path, that means everything is open for experience. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you can learn from these experiences, we polish our rough edges so by the time we get done, we look like a beautiful, polished gemstone. That's the journey, what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. Well, if you talk to shamans, the sages, the healers, let's not forget the mystics, the people who we call the wisdom keepers. By the way, this is a guy called Rose Perry from New Zealand, who is a mystic healer. Ask these people, what exactly is spirituality all about? Across the board, around the cultures of the world, throughout time, you'll hear them say three things. Relationships, values, and a meaningful purpose in life. This is the hallmark of human spirituality. And these are not Catholic aspects, they're not Jewish, they're not Shinto, they're not Islamic, they are human aspects of spirituality. And it turns out that whenever you take a look at your list of stressors, I guarantee they'll all involve these things here. I give an assignment in my class. I say, write down your top 10 stressors. And I say, if you have 47, I just want 10. If you've got 3, don't make up 7. Take a look at your list and mark off everything that involves a relationship, even if it's how you are dealing with yourself. Put a check mark next to it. Put a check mark next to everything that involves a value or value conflict. Put a check mark next to everything that involves a meaningful purpose in life. And when you get done, if you're honest with yourself, you'll see everything is checked off. The relationship between stress and spirituality is very, very huge. But it doesn't mean that we should ignore it. Let's take a closer look. We have two kinds of relationships. We have internal, how you deal with yourself. How well do you know yourself? This is called soul searching. Take time to go inside. And I'm a little scared about the technology revolution we're in right now because everyone's plugged into something. People are not taking time to go inside. I follow the advice of Eric Clapton. Unplugged. Take time to go inside. I'm glad some of you caught that joke. Okay. You know, we're all about the same age here, give or take a few decades. So, this is internal. And it's also how is your relationship with your higher self, whatever you perceive as to be. We also talk about external relationships. And this is basically how you deal with everything else. Not just your family, not just your colleagues at work. This is actually everybody and everything. The American Indian tradition says this is the water you drink, the ground you walk on, the animals you come in contact with. They have a wonderful expression. It's a prayer from the Lakota Sioux tribe that says, all my relations. Everything is a relationship. According to the wonderful wisdom from Chief Seattle, he said, man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Relationships. And then we talk about the idea of values and value systems. And this is a topic most people don't talk about until there's some crisis going on. But my question to you is, what are your values? And people who study values, they actually say there's a core set of values you have, about 5 or 6, and then you have supporting values that support the core values. And every now and then, they shift. They move from category to category. And when this happens, there's tectonic plates moving. All of a sudden now, things feel a bit unstable. The biggest value conflict we have in this culture right now is freedom versus responsibility. Huge. But we also have freedom versus privacy. You've heard Mark Zuckerberg. He said privacy is so 20th century. Ouch. But this is a value conflict. And where there's a conflict, there is stress. And last but not least, we talk about the idea of a meaningful purpose in life. Why are we here? You know, the two most important questions you can ask yourself are, who are you and why are you here? So who are you? Who do you think you are? You know, when I was a little kid, my mom would say, young man, just who do you think you are? If I had known she was asking a spiritually based question, I would have given a whole different answer. Why are we here? This is the cornerstone of human spirituality. And where there's a lack of meaning in life, there is definitely stress. I love the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who, by the way, psychiatrist, written this manuscript called A Doctor in the Soul. He was on his way to the publisher when he got picked up by the SS troops and hauled off to Auschwitz. He had a theory called logotherapy that said, if you have a reason to live, you can withstand any stressor. And then he was given the worst data collection in the world, the prisoners of Auschwitz, the ones who were allowed to live. If you take a look at his book called Man's Search for Meaning, you ever had a bad day, read that book. It'll make your day seem like a bed of roses. It's unbelievable. So a purpose in life is core to human spirituality. And when people go through things like retirement, or I worked with Olympic athletes, and I got to tell you, when the last Olympic race is done, there's a term for it. It's called Olympic blues, where they now look at themselves thinking, now what do I do? I had students who would say, I'm going to graduate with a degree I have no interest in. I did this for my parents. Huge purpose in life issues at 22. This is not just for a midlife crisis. This can happen at any time. That's why Carl Jung said, every crisis can be a spiritual crisis. I have a feeling now, if he were alive today, he'd knock the age limit out entirely and just say every crisis is a spiritual crisis. So I love this quote. It says, my life has a superb cast, but I can't figure out the plot. So I heard Kubler-Ross, as I mentioned to you, and I went down to meet her after her talk, and I got in line. It's kind of like, touch the robe. And when it came my turn, she said, what's your name? And I said, my friends call me Luke. And she said, Luke, what's your passion in life? She didn't say, what do you do for a living? She goes, what's your passion in life? And I said, everything you're speaking about. The integration, balance, and harmony of mind, body, spirit, and emotions. And she said, I need your help. And I said, how? And she said, would you help me and people like me reintroduce the ideas of human spirituality back into healthcare, back into health education? And when I said yes, I felt like I was knighted by the Queen. And that's been my mission for the past 30-some years. So when I wrote this textbook on stress management, I thought I cannot do a book without addressing the issues of human spirituality. This would be gross negligence in the big picture. So I wrote a chapter on stress and spirituality, and I braved an attempt to make a definition. I thought I'd share with you right now, but I want to tell you it's a bad definition. Because how do you define human spirituality? All right, here goes. I say human spirituality is the maturation process of higher consciousness, as expressed through the dynamic interactions of three facets. Number one, an insightful and nurturing relationship with both oneself and others. Number two, a strong personal value system. And number three, the cultivation and fulfillment of a meaningful purpose in one's life. I'll be the first to tell you, this is not a great definition. But I'm in academia. I wanted to keep my head and not get burned to the stake. So I played it safe. And I also knew that by putting this out there, it would be on the table for discussion, because up until this point, there was no textbook in health education that addressed anything about spirituality. If you were lucky if you saw a sentence that said spiritual well-being, period. That is what my dad would call as a half-baked job. Okay, he used a different expression, but I think you know what it is. So, again, I'm going to now ask you what Kubler-Ross asked me. Would you help me and people like me reintroduce the ideas of human spirituality back into healthcare, back into health education? Because without it, we've got a dysfunctional world. It is so important to include the integration, balance, and harmony of mind, body, spirit, and emotions. Well, I made this model, and it turns out in academia, to look real professional, I have to make up theoretical models, and so I made one. And it turns out I was at this conference, and someone said, you're missing a piece of your model. And I said, yeah, I know. I didn't want to get burnt to the stake. He goes, it's time. So the fourth aspect is what I call the divine mystery. There are things that we encounter that cannot be explained by Western science. Oprah talks about this. There are all kinds of case studies of mystical experiences. And the research shows over 80% of Americans have had a mystical experience that can't be explained. This is what I call the divine mystery. Something beyond the five senses, where you know to be true because you've had the experience. No one can take it away from you. So I want to give you a couple of examples. This is actually a photograph of the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. I didn't take it. I was actually at someone's house who is an energy healer. And I won't go into the details, but I got to his house early for my class, and I saw a painting of the Grand Canyon in the living room. Then I saw a painting of the Tetons. Then I saw this photograph of the Virgin Mary. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Last time I checked, there were no cameras in the year 1. What's going on here? And Miatek comes over to me and he says, interesting, isn't it? And I said, yeah. I said, where'd you get this? And he said, well, one of my clients went over to Medjugorje, Yugoslavia, back before it broke up. And there was a church in Medjugorje where 3 kids would see an apparition of the Virgin Mary. And people would take pilgrimages to go to this church. Have you ever heard of this? Well, adults couldn't see this, but these 3 kids could. It sounds like an episode of E.T., Go Home. Kids have the veils taken away. And these kids could see this. And people would go there, and one guy, this guy, went there with his camera and took a picture of the blank wall that he saw these kids staring at. He gets home, he got 3 rolls of film, took 3 rolls of film. This is back in the film. He gets his film back. First roll, blank walls, all 36 exposures. The next roll, blank wall on every 36 exposures. The last roll of film, the 30th image was this. How do you explain this? How do you explain this? I'm not sure we can. It's a mystery. Also, crop circles. I bet you never thought you'd hear this in the Mayo Clinic. I know, it's a first for many people. Now, I will tell you this, that there may be an explanation, and maybe one day we'll find out. Crop circles now, I think it's fascinating. First of all, they're very artistic. NASA is fascinated with this. Probably the U.S. Army is too, but it turns out that the Japanese are very fascinated, and they've got permission to put cameras up in these fields in England, and they now know these things occurred in less than 3 seconds. It's as if all of the crops conspire to make a pattern. And when humans try and do it, they snap the stalks down at the base of the ground. The ones that are made mysteriously, no breakage. There's a lot more to this than we have time to go into, but right now it's a mystery. By the way, this one's right by Stonehenge, and the story behind this one is a pilot flew over, and because there's a military base there, and he looked down and didn't see anything. He said, he's coming in for a sortie. And the next guy came in and said, oh my God. So they know this one, every 20 minutes they have sorties. They knew this one occurred in 20 minutes. You cannot get 2 drunk guys with boards and ropes to do this in 20 minutes. They tried. It doesn't work. How does it happen? I don't know. It's a mystery. I got one more for you. I take people on group trips to Ireland. I'm of Irish background. My mom's name is McNulty. We got the Egans and the McKittricks. Ireland's a gorgeous place. Anybody here of Irish descent? Anybody been to Ireland? Okay, so they got a lot of sacred places over there. So the last day, my group gave me a present. This is actually a Celtic symbol. It's the Celtic cross in a circle. And someone took a picture. Actually, 3 people took a picture. It's on all 3, but I'm just going to show you one. That is an orb. It's not part of my sweater. That's an orb. And I don't know if you can see very closely, but there's actually a labyrinth design in it. It's almost as if one circle is speaking to the other. I don't know. Just a mystery. The point is this. You don't have to levitate or bilocate to be a mystic. All it takes is to appreciate the mystery. That's what the message is. Can we appreciate there's more going on than we'll ever know? Every now and then we get a chance to peek behind the curtain, just for a moment, and it's like, yes, there is a bigger picture going on. We're never going to understand it all, but it doesn't mean we can't appreciate it. And I hope that you have those mystical moments too. To me, whenever someone's cancer goes in a spontaneous remission, I mean, I could have told you that one. You probably already heard those before. I thought I'd give you something new to walk out and say, can you believe we heard about crop circles at Mayo Clinic? Oh my God. So I want to share with you what I think is the most important part of this talk. People tell me this is what they get out of it. I have read or talked to numerous spiritual luminaries. And I notice a pattern in all of the wisdom they share, and I put it into a context for academia I call the seasons of a soul. There are 4 distinct seasons. The first one is the centering process, much like autumn. The next one is the emptying process, akin to winter. The next one is the grounding process, like spring. And the last one is the connecting process, like summer. Let's take a closer look. So the centering process says take time to go inside. If you take a look at the word center, you'll see the word enter. You see that? How cool is that? The word center means to enter the heart. The C in center stands for the French word core, which means to go inside. This is like in autumn when the light diminishes, we go inside early. And that's the message. Take time to go inside. Do some soul searching. Take time to get to know yourself better. Take time to ask yourself your thoughts. Are these valuable? I love the expression in Boulder we have, bumper sticker that says, don't believe everything you think. Okay? Centering process. Take time to really expand and see what are your thoughts still valid, and are the things you need to discard that at one time may have served you, but now they no longer do. So the centering process says take time to go inside, and the autumn is the symbolic aspect of this. We go in early as light diminishes, we go inside. And inside, we take time to survey the inner landscape, the spiritual landscape. Next comes the emptying process. The emptying process is a time where once we're inside, we clear house. We start getting rid of things we no longer need. Thoughts, perceptions, attitudes, belief that at one time may have served us, now they no longer do. And the emptying process goes by a great number of names. You know it most best as this, the dark night of the soul. But the dark night is only supposed to be a night. It's not supposed to be an eternity. Shakespeare had a whole different name for it. King Richard III's play, this is the winter of my discontent. And this is the winter season. I love this quote, by the way. It says, when you come to the edge of all the light you have and must take a step into the darkness of the unknown, believe that one of two things will happen. Either there will be something solid for you to stand on, or you will be taught how to fly. The emptying process is the void. We are encouraged to enter the void. But the void really isn't a pit of despair. The void is the womb of creation. And we're only going to work through our spiritual process if we continue going through these cycles of the season. But a lot of people say, no, I'm not going in there. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to hang on the edge. And people who hang on the edge become what I refer to as being spiritually constipated. Maybe you know people like that. But this speaks of the message to be in this world, but not of it. We have to enter the void. And once you do, the promise is that nature abhors a vacuum. Whatever you let go of will be replaced by something of equal or greater value. So the emptying process is where a lot of people get stuck. Yet we're supposed to be moving because spirit means energy that moves, the inhalation and the exhalation. Unless you're Bill Clinton, only did one of those. I forget which one. Then comes the grounding process. The grounding process is, this is the eureka moment. This is the vision of the vision quest. By the way, I got to tell you, you guys look like you're too serious now, so I'll give you a little comic relief. I'm out hiking at Rocky Mountain National Park. This is like about an hour from where I live. And Europeans wear very colorful clothing when they hike. Americans, not so much. I see this guy, I'm thinking, like, this is going to make a great picture. It must be from Europe. So I said, excuse me, can I take a picture? And he turns around and he goes, sprechen Sie Deutsch? And I said, machen Sie Foto? And he goes, ja. And I wanted the picture of this eureka moment where you get that message. And I said, could you reach your arms up in the sky? And he goes, yeah. And I said, could you turn around? He goes, I don't have any money. The grounding process is that nugget, that divine wisdom that you get that helps you get from point A to point B. You are on top of the mountain. You get that vision. This is what helps you now in the next phase of your life. But the top of the mountain is very inhospitable. And the vision quest does not end when you get the vision. You've got to come back to your community and share what you learned. So the growing process is like springtime. It's new growth. It's new possibilities. And it's only going to happen when you make room for it. And when you do, it's that eureka moment where you think, oh my God, I get it. This is amazing. But then we have to continue the process because the next one's called the connecting process. And this is like summertime. What happens in summertime? Well, I'll tell you. Barbecue, picnics, reunions, weddings. People come together and gather. And the connecting process is a time of coming together. It's a celebration. This is the final stage of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey where you come home and you celebrate what you learned. And greed is not a spiritual value. Now, I guarantee you someone's going to ask you, what'd you do at lunch? I guarantee you're not going to say, I'm not going to tell you. Greed is not a spiritual value. You're going to share what you learn. That's part of the whole education process at Mayo, is to share and make the world a better place. This is part of the connecting process where we celebrate. This is Disney World. This is the warm, fuzzy puppies. This is the sunsets. But this is, you can't live here the whole time. You've got to continue through the cycle. And here's what makes life challenging. You can be in the emptying process in your relationship, and you can be in the connecting process in work. Or you can actually be in one phase of a process and your spouse be in another. Makes it very, very challenging because life is dynamic. These phases go on. Well, my model, I talked about spiritual potential. This is actually what helps us get through the tough times. This is a short list, and I call these muscles of a soul. I ask people how they get through tough times, and I ask people this because I have a sign on my forehead that says, please, tell me your life story, and the worse it is, the more I want to hear it. And they all fall into two categories, victims and victors. Victims, story's the same one, it gets boring, I stop listening to those. The victors, I'm all ears. And I ask them, how'd you get through this? And you know what they say? It was my sense of humor. It was my sense of faith. It was my sense of optimism. It was my sense of forgiveness. And what I think to myself is, these aren't gifts for a chosen few. These are birthrights for everybody. This is all part of us. But these are muscles like our physical muscles, and they will atrophy if we don't use them. We are called on a regular basis to put these into play. And the reason why love is in capital letters is because I heard Norman Cousins speak at Johns Hopkins Medical University, Johns Hopkins Medical, before he passed away, and he said up on stage, you know, Norman Cousins, the father of humor therapy, he says, "I never said humor cured me." People are kind of like, "Oh my God, why'd we come tonight?" And he said, "I never even said humor healed me." People kind of sinking down their chairs. And then he said, "It was love that healed me. Humor is a metaphor for love." And when I heard this, I thought, if that's the case, these are all colors of love's rainbow. And these are things we need to work on. And so spiritual potential says, yeah, we got the potential. Are you using it? Spiritual health says, let's put them into play. And so by using these as a means to deal with our stress, then we begin to transcend the problem and move on. Because spirit is not meant to be stuck. Spirit is meant to move on. I'm going to end right there because it looks like we're having time to, I want to make sure you guys get on to your next meta rounds here. But I do want to end with a poem. And the poem is something that I thought would be kind of nice to hear because how often do you hear poems at presentations at grand rounds? Ever? I taught the stress management class, and it turns out that I had a student who said to me, everything you're talking about stress management, I've already heard before. And this kid didn't even shave, so I knew it wasn't true. But I said, really, what? And he said, well, I take Tai Chi. It's all about balance. You're talking about all about balance. And I said, really? He goes, yeah, I heard this expression you might want to know about. It's called stand like mountain, flow like water. I got goosebumps when I heard that. To stand like mountain means to be strong, to be secure, to be stable in your environment in the winds of change. To flow like water means to be able to go with the flow with things you can't control. I've discovered that every culture has a similar expression. The Chinese just condensed it to 6 words. So I was up in the Tetons trying to work on the book, and I had a poem in the front. I thought the book's all about balance. I should put a poem in the back. So here's what I came up with. To walk the human path is hard. To stay put is not an option. At times, my head is filled with doubt. I pause, uncertain and insecure. Then I hear these words aloud. Stand like mountain, flow like water. I walk each step in search of truth. My quest brings both joy and sorrow. Light and dark dance unified. Yes, balance is a key to life. Again I hear these words aloud. Stand like mountain, flow like water. We come to earth to learn to love, a lesson we must all master. To know and serve the will of God, not a task for a chosen few. We must each answer the call to love. Stand like mountain, flow like water. Thank you for coming today. God bless. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. They might come up and ask, yeah. I've seen people.
If anyone has any questions, Dr. Seaward will be around for a few minutes afterwards. There's also evaluation forms on the table in the back if you're willing to help fill that out for